So this should look familiar. This is our toaster from a while ago. What we're going to talk today about is the ability to give our toaster color, to give him a texture more than anything else. And we're gonna go simple with these. Building these characters can get pretty complicated. What I'd rather do than spend too much more time on them is we're going to kind of go Toy Story-esque here, and we're going to work with less realistic textures and materials as opposed to going photographic with them. Doing this can be kind of fun because it might give you a little bit of a break from the modeling process or anything like that. So anyway, I've got my oddball toaster thing going on here. Whenever you are going to add a texture to something, in Blender they're really called materials. What we're looking for here is this button. So you're going to click on that. Oh, and he's already got a material. Usually what it'll look like is it'll look like this. Okay, there's nothing there. You're going to hit the plus symbol. It's going to add a material in here. Actually, no, take that back. You can hit the new symbol. There we go. And this is going to create the beginnings of your material. Now, a couple of things are pretty easy to do here. The first thing is just this right here, because it's a sphere, does not mean that it's not working on your object. It is. This is just a preview, and you can change the preview to anything you'd like. Okay, well, not anything, but hair, particles. That shows you kind of like the sky. I usually keep it on a cube or a sphere, whichever one is closest to what I'm trying to do. Basically, nice and simple. Then the next thing that you can change right here is the diffuse color. And the diffuse color is essentially the base color of the material itself. So if I'm trying to make this like, say, stainless steel, okay, probably a nice light gray color wouldn't be too big of a stretch, right? Something like that. And then what you have here is again, your preview is going to kind of show you what's going on. And you'll notice that the object did change color a little bit. The intensity down here controls literally the intensity of the color. Okay, it's kind of nice. Basically a little bit brighter, a little darker. I do believe it comes at 0.8 is the standard. That's usually a good place to at least start. Now, the speculars. The specular is your specular highlights. And if you take a look at the sphere, I changed it to a sphere for this because the preview it'll show better on a sphere. Specular highlights are basically those points of the object where the highlight is a pure white. Essentially, specular highlights are really reflections. Okay, and depending upon how shiny the material is, how reflective the material is, the speculars will be a little different. But you can also adjust them here by doing anything. You can change their color. So you can say my reflections, my speculars will be red. See how that changed to a red highlight? You can also adjust let's keep a color on it. You can adjust how intense they're going to be. So as I ramp that up, you can see the blue gets brighter. You can also increase the hardness of the specular. And what that means is as you go further and further and further, I'm just clicking and dragging to the right. You can also type it in. Okay, I guess there's a maximum of 511. What you'll notice is that the highlight has gotten smaller, okay, and it has also gotten sharper. The edge is not blurry anymore. This is really important for things like metal or glass or highly polished surfaces like a nicely polished table. Something like that would most likely have a specular highlight that's a little sharper. Okay, because sharper usually is this, equivalent to a surface that is shiny. It's not a big deal, but 100 is probably moderately hard. That's pretty good. Let's take it back to white here. The next thing is the shading. Now, one of the easy things to do is you can collapse these, by the way, okay, just so that you can kind of keep this up. The shading is interesting because what this does is this will allow you to make your object emit light. This is very interesting. So you can actually make your object glow, which is kind of cool. And you can also make an object insensitive to light or shadow. So in other words, I can also say that this object will never have any light or shadows on it, which is again kind of an interesting thing. I can't remember any time when I've ever used that or had a student use that, but it's there. It's kind of cool. There's other things to play with. The ambient light, when we talk about global ambient light, remember we were dealing with that. The global ambient light is something that you set when you're rendering. You can also control how objects will accept that light. So if you don't want this to accept that ambient light at all, you can slide it down. So there's also, we had a question. So the next thing is our transparency, and transparency is exactly what you think it is. When you click the check mark, you then get these options kind of come in here, and you can adjust the transparency of an object pretty nicely, okay? So anywhere in the middle or anything like that. Now what's interesting is you also have different variations. I find that ray trace is much better to use than the Z transparency. The ray trace takes longer to render when you actually make your final movie, but it's generally considered a much more accurate thing. And with ray trace, you'll notice that a whole bunch of new options kind of pop up here, including index of refraction, fall off, and all sorts of depth, like how far deep you're going to see through it, that sort of thing. Gloss, there's all sorts of great stuff that comes in. Index of refraction is actually something that I want to kind of pop up there. There is a specific index of refraction for different materials. So I believe water is around 1.33 or something like there. So, you can be pretty precise with what you want to do as far as your materials are concerned. There are lists available online. You just type in index of refraction, and it will tell you what a diamond is versus water versus glass versus whatever. And it's really cool because when you do that, the material actually really does behave in a different way, and you can see how it's now it's basically magnifying the background, warping it. What index of refraction basically is the measurement of how much the material bends the light rays that are coming through it. If any of you ever end up taking AP Physics or anything like that, you might end up doing an optics unit where they talk about index of refraction. It was one of my favorite units in physics when I was in high school, and fortunately I didn't take it in college, but it's cool. There's some other things in here. You can also control the specular. So if you want the specular to come down in its opacity, you can do that as well. The Fresnel is basically allows us to turn into a lens of sorts. Let's take the alpha up a little bit. I'm going to take the Fresnel up. And you can notice that as I do this, the interior becomes more transparent, but the exterior becomes more opaque. So it's essentially acting as a lens, which I find it can be kind of fun. And a Fresnel lens is a type of lens. They're used on spotlights, photographic lights. I've used Fresnel lenses a lot since I'm a photographer in the studio to focus lights. I've also used them in some cameras where they have Fresnel focusing glass for being able to really focus on your subject really nicely. I mean, so Fresnel is kind of a fun thing to play with. Again, I don't know how much people would use it, but there we go. Now, obviously, our toaster, we don't want to make it transparent, although that would be kind of cool to have a glass toaster. But yeah, it'd probably be pretty hot, and on top of that, all I would ever see would be the crumbs at the bottom, and that would probably annoy me. The next thing is the mirroring. So let's do the mirroring. And mirroring is, again, very similar to what you think it's going to be. As you increase the reflectivity here, it's going to mirror more and more of the world around it. And again, you have Fresnel, okay, which is going to, again, kind of start bending things, act as a light. So look how the mirroring does not take place in the middle. It only takes place around the edges, okay, which is an interesting little thing there. You can also kind of change colors here so that you're not actually changing the color of the object itself. You're changing the color of what it mirrors, which is kind of interesting. I could think of some fun stuff you could probably play with on that, but we'll just leave it for white here. And again, max depth, okay, and that's interreflections and like the depth of how far it's going to calculate your reflections and so on and so forth. Pretty cool. Well, I'll let you can explore the rest. We'll just keep these to be what they are for now. Because there's a bunch of other options, and subsurface scattering is something we really don't need to go into for now. This is just the basics. And the options and stuff like that. We don't really need to worry about them too much, but if you want to, you can do searches for this kind of stuff, and there are some awesome websites and tutorials out there. So now, for right now, we have the start of a texture, or a material. What we can also do is add a texture to it. So this second button here is textures. And adding a texture to your object brings in a whole new level of what you can do with your materials. So I'm just going to click New here, just like that. And it always starts out with your clouds, is kind of the default. But you can click on this, and there's a whole bunch of options. We're going to leave clouds on now, but you can play with these. You can put an image on top. You could do all sorts of stuff. Most of you won't be getting into that because that is really complicated, wrapping an image around an object, but or marble or whatever. And whenever you do this, right down here, you get a whole series of controls. And these controls here, so it says marble. If I go back up here and I choose clouds again, you'll notice that now I've got my clouds here. These change, obviously. Oh, and under my preview, you can, right now it's just set the texture. You can set it to the material, which is your what it's going to look like and it's done, or both. And this is how I like to look at it. I like to see the flat version, and I like to see the final version on a previewed object. Now, one of the things to realize is sometimes heavy mirroring, heavy reflections, transparency can oftentimes really make it a lot harder to see what you're doing in the textures area. So a lot of times I'll go back in and I'll just uncheck that. Excuse me. And then I'll go back to my textures. I'll fiddle with this, and then before I'm done, I just remember to go back and turn the mirroring back on. So with my clouds, I can change the size of the clouds. I can make them smaller. I can make them bigger. I can, I don't know what nabla really is, but you can change depth. If you're on something like the marble or wood, you can again change the size of the texture. You can also increase the turbulence of a texture. You can just play with all sorts of stuff to kind of play with how it works, how you want it to look. And one of the things that probably some of you are noticing or wondering about is, where did this pink come from? What is that? Why is that there? Well, when you go back down, let's close all these others. When you go down here to the bottom, you have this thing called influence. And the influence is basically a checker for what this texture is going to affect on our object. And right now it's affecting color. So right now, you'll see it's set to mix and color, and oh, there's that pink color that we're seeing up here. So if I go here and I click on this and I change it to blue, you'll see the blue color. But that's not all you can do with this, obviously. You can change all these to see what happens. You can try a divide or a difference, okay? These are basically, those of you who are familiar with Photoshop, that's what this is. These things. Most of the time you're going to be on mix, which means where it's white, it's going to be the color from the material window, and where it's black, it's going to be our blue color. Okay? But we don't have to use color. So if I uncheck color and I go here to geometry, I can check my normals. And what it's going to do, let's increase the... You can see how it's starting to alter the texture, the actual surface of our object. Let's get something that's a little bit more, let's do something a little bit more obvious. Let's increase or decrease our size here. And we can increase our turbulence. Yeah, it's starting to look, Cocoa Puff or a Kix or something like that. It's kind of funny. And you don't have to, again, this is the marble. A lot of times the clouds are awesome because what you can do with the clouds is you can do a lot with them, shrink them down, it makes a real interesting texture. And you can kind of play with a lot of these. You can do multiples, so I can say color and my normals. So now the color changes, and I can make it lighter or darker. I can also change the intensity. So it's kind of nice, and you can slide each one individually to kind of increase or decrease the power of that influence over that part of the object. I can make it mirror. I can add a mirror effect. So let's just show you. That's going to be really tough to see. Where it will mirror only where the black areas are. I can make an alpha, so it goes transparent. Let's see here. It's not really doing that. It's not showing it, but it would when we rendered. Some things don't always show up in the preview window the way that they're actually going to be, which is kind of a good step into the next thing. So if you really want to see what this is going to look like, you need to do what we call test render. Test render is just a simple one-frame render. We're not rendering a movie. It doesn't usually take too long. So let's just test this oddball color texture that I've got for my toaster here. Now the first thing I really need to make sure of is where my camera is and that the object is in the view of the camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to where it says default. I'm going to click on the little window, and I'm going to go to animation. Or you can hit the 0 on the keypad, and it will show you exactly what the camera is going to show you, which is kind of cool. But what I like to do is I like to go to animation, and we can just make these small here. And then you can see up here in the top left-hand corner, I'm making it really big so we can see it. I've got a good view from the camera perspective. So then in my 3D view, I'm going to kind of fly away back here. I can now drag my camera. Whoops. Okay. So that I can see the object, the way I might want to, just to kind of get a sense of texture. The other thing that's going to be important is realize your light needs to be right around here. And if the light is behind the object, you might not be able to see it. So I'm going to put the light behind it, and let's go test render. So then I'm going to go down here. I'm going to click on my camera button, which I was already there, and I'm going to change the display to new window. This is important because if I don't do that, if I just do image editor, it's going to get rid of this view when I render it, which isn't a big deal. We can get it back, but I just like to put it in a new window. Then you've got all these other options down here. We're not going to get into those right now. All we need to really know is go to our shading, okay, menu here, and make sure everything is turned on except color unpremultiply. We don't need that for right now, okay? So then I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to hit render and I'm going to hit single image, okay? And a single image pops up. Blender oftentimes will freak out. And now you can see the problem with having the light behind the object where the camera is, because now we really can't see the front surface, okay? So I'm just going to drag my light in front of the object here and re-render another test image. Wow, that's much better. So now I can start to get a sense of what my texture is going to be. Let's take a look at what happens, okay, if I start changing my texture around a little bit. Let's put this sideways a little bit. So I'm going to right-click on this guy. I'm going to go back to my texture, and I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to set up those normals, okay? So I'm going to create the influence is as high as it can get. So let's just see what that looks like. Notice it's taking a little longer this time, too. Interesting. So now it looks like it's been at the bottom of the ocean for a long time and it's gotten rotten away or something. But you can see, or yeah, it looks like a blue brain. You can kind of see, how that affects things. Let's try one last thing here where I have it affect my transparency. So I'm going to go to my texture, have it affect the alpha. And I'm going to take the intensity off and the color off and the normals, and I'm only going to have it affect my, and then I'm going to take the alpha down to 0. Okay? So what that should do, oh, wait, -1? 0. 0 is what I said. What it should do is it should make it transparent in certain places. And it didn't. Wondering if I have to have transparency set in the material first. Not sure. Let's try it now. Yeah, now it's kind of seeing through itself. You can kind of see the interior of the object, but it's still not, the material or the texture is not influencing it the way I thought it would. No, it should be on mix. That should work. Not quite sure. I'd have to play around with it some more. I'm not exactly sure why it's not working, but you get the idea. It should be. I'm missing something. But you get the idea how this is working. So there's kind of semi-transparent. Let's take our, we'll just do one last fun thing here. So we're going to take my transparency alpha down even more, and then we're going to go to our textures, and I'll just, let's go back to our normals here. We can actually go to our color too. So now you can kind of see here how it's going to, basically you're going to get a splash of blue color in there and a little bit of bump, and you're also going to get kind of it's going to be semi-transparent, so it's seeing down inside and everything. I mean, that's kind of cool. It looks even more like a brain now in some ways. So anyway, you get the idea. This is just the basics of textures. It's a lot of exploration. If you have a specific material that you want, all you really need to do is go to Google and type in how to make glass in Blender. And you will get a website that will literally give you step by step all the settings with index of refraction, what the reflectivity should be, what the specular should be. All those things are available for you online to help you just make a certain texture. So in this case, I would go Google, how to make stainless steel, and I would make a nice stainless steel toaster. Right? Nice and simple. Any questions? Okay then, that is enough.